Welcome, everybody, to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a plunge, you could say, into some of the most fascinating ideas at the heart of Jewish thought, specifically in Kabbalah and Chassidut.
Yeah, we're going on a deep dive, really going deep, exploring faith, prayer, and how they relate to the concept of divine providence.
Exactly. And we'll be looking at texts like the Zohar and the Tanya to unpack this.
And along the way, we'll be pulling out key takeaways, some practical, some philosophical, all insightful, to help you understand faith, the meaning of prayer, and your role, your very place, in the divine plan.
Yeah, I think a good place for us to start might be with faith, or emunah, as it's known in Hebrew. What's always fascinated me is the link between emunah and the word for truth, emet.
Right off the bat, you've hit a major point. It's not just a linguistic coincidence, is it? True faith, according to these traditions, isn't just a blind leap, It's much more about actively aligning yourself with the ultimate truth, the fabric of reality, how God designed the universe, the seen and the unseen.
That makes a lot of sense. It turns faith from something you just feel into something far more substantial. Now, the Tanya talks about emunah as the soul's natural state. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Absolutely. So the Tanya, if you're not familiar, it's a central text in Chabad Chassidut. And it explains that emunah isn't something you find outside of yourself. It's not something you acquire. It's described as a deep, innate knowing that God is present. It resides within your very soul. It's an awareness that goes beyond the intellect. You can almost think of it like an inner compass, pointing towards the divine.
That's a beautiful image. And how does the Zohar, that foundational text of Kabbalah, add to this understanding of emunah?
The Zohar takes it to a cosmic scale. It teaches that emunah, faith, is the very foundation upon which the universe is built and sustained. The world endures, exists, because of God's truth. So to live with emunah means living in harmony with that reality, with that truth. It's about attuning yourself to that fundamental frequency.
Okay, I'm starting to get a much clearer picture of emunah now. Now, our sources dive into the story of Abraham during the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. It's a powerful, challenging story that feels like the ultimate test of faith.
It really is a pivotal moment, a true test of faith. Remember, God promised Abraham that Isaac would be his heir, and then commands him to sacrifice Isaac.
It seems impossible to reconcile those two things. How can you hold both of those realities as true? It feels like hitting a wall logically.
Here's where the Kabbalistic perspective gets so interesting. It explains that faith, emunah, operates beyond our logical paradoxes. Abraham's faith wasn't just intellectual agreement. It was a deep understanding that God's ways aren't bound by human logic. He understood that God works within natural law, but also has the power to go beyond it.
So Abraham wasn't trying to solve a logic puzzle. He was trusting in something beyond his understanding.
Exactly. The Midrash and Rashi, essential commentaries, explain that Abraham fully trusted God's ability to either bring Isaac back to life after the sacrifice or fulfill the promise in some miraculous way. He knew that God's word was true, even if he couldn't understand how.
That's a level of trust that's hard to even fathom, and the Zohar adds another layer to the Akedah, right?
Yeah, the Zohar says that Abraham's incredible faith during the Akedah, his emunah, actually opened a cosmic channel of mercy into the world. His unwavering belief, even when asked to make such a sacrifice, allowed God's kindness to be revealed even more powerfully. This was a key moment, showing that emunah is believing in divine truth even when it doesn't make sense to us.
It revealed something essential about the divine, that even in difficult situations, there's still this undercurrent of mercy.
Exactly. It showed that even in strict judgment, God's kindness can still find a way through.
That's really quite profound. Now, our sources bring up Ishmael and Esau in relation to faith. What do they represent in the context of spiritual growth?
Ishmael and Esau. They're really great examples, symbolic representations of imbalanced approaches to faith and action. Ishmael is often seen as embodying a passive faith. Someone who trusts God but doesn't take personal responsibility. It's that whole God will provide idea without taking action themselves.
Got it. So what about Esau? He seems like he'd be the opposite.
Exactly. Esau represents the other extreme, a focus purely on physical effort, on the natural world, often neglecting spirituality, prayer, or divine guidance. It's the idea that the world just operates according to natural laws, and that's it.
So neither of those approaches is ideal. How do we find the balance? What's the Jewish perspective on this?
Judaism emphasizes a balance between faith, emunah, and action, which is often called hishtadlut. It encourages you to engage actively with the world, to take action, but with an underlying trust in God, a reliance on prayer for guidance and support.
That brings to mind Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Didn't he have a great saying about this balance?
Oh, absolutely. Rabbi Nachman teaches a person must pray as if everything depends on God, but act as if everything depends on Him. It really captures that beautiful duality.
It really does. So it's about taking responsibility, putting in the work, but also knowing that ultimate success comes from a higher source, a source we connect to through prayer and faith.
Exactly. It's about infusing your actions with faith, recognizing that while you have a role to play, you're not alone. There's a divine partnership in this process of growth and achievement.
It's all starting to come together beautifully. Let's go a little deeper into the Kabbalistic understanding of Emunah. Our sources say it goes beyond just rational belief.
Right. In Kabbalah, Emunah isn't just about using your intellect. It's understood as a connection to God's higher will that goes beyond logic. It's deeply tied to emet, truth, the very structure of the universe.
So when Abraham faced that impossible situation with Isaac, his Emunah allowed him to hold both the promise and the command as true without needing to solve it with his mind.
Exactly. His faith operated beyond contradiction. He accepted seemingly opposing ideas because he knew God's wisdom was beyond human understanding. This relates to the Sephira of Chokmah, representing that spark of divine wisdom that transcends our intellect, which is Bina.
So Chokmah is like that flash of knowing, and Bina is about intellectual understanding. So Emunah is connected to that initial spark.
Precisely. And remember, Ishmael and Esau, they're relevant here too.
I thought so.
Ishmael is distorted faith, passive, and Esau is all about relying only on natural law, leaving God out. True Emunah, true faith, balances action and trust.
Fascinating. Now, the sources compare Job and Abraham, how they approached Emunah. There seems to be a very important distinction there.
Definitely, both are righteous, but the responses to challenges show us different sides of Emunah. Abraham, as we've seen, shows an absolute trust in God, even when things seem impossible.
And Job's story takes a different turn.
Right. He starts strong, accepts his suffering, but as it goes on, he starts to question, even demands an explanation from God.
So the difference lies in that questioning and demanding answers.
Exactly. Some say Job's faith was strong but conditional, based on a certain expectation how things should work. Abraham's Emunah went beyond that. He trusted even when things seemed completely contradictory or unjust.
It's about trusting that even when God's plan is hidden, even if we don't understand why things happen, there's ultimate justice.
That's it. That's a great way to put it.
Okay, that was an incredibly insightful exploration of Emunah. Now, what about prayer, or tefillah? I think a lot of people wonder, if everything is guided by divine law, what's the point of prayer?
That's a fantastic question and gets to the core of our relationship with God. The Zohar provides a really nuanced perspective. It explains that prayer, tefillah, isn't just about asking for things. It's about actively aligning your will with God's will.
Aligning, not just asking. That really changes things.
It really does. Rabbi Chama Volozhin, in his book Nefesh HaChaim, teaches that sincere prayer changes the person praying. It elevates you spiritually, makes you more open to blessings. It's about transforming yourself as much as it is about seeking a specific outcome.
So prayer is not just God changing things externally, it's also about God working within you.
Exactly. And the Baal Shem Tov adds to this by saying that praying with true intention, Kavanaugh, draws down divine light into the physical world. This can lead to changes that go beyond what we normally think of as natural law.
So prayer can be a catalyst for miracles, in a sense.
You could say that. By connecting to the divine through prayer, you open yourself up to possibilities that might not have happened otherwise. It's about tapping into a higher reality through connection.
So it's much more than just a list of requests. Let's move to the Kabbalistic view of prayer. How does it fit into our spiritual growth and how we understand divine will?
Kabbalah says, as we touched on earlier, that prayer isn't about changing God's will, but aligning ourselves with it. The Zohar describes prayer as unifying the upper and lower worlds, like a channel for divine energy. When you pray with deep Kavanaugh, with focused intention, you're elevating your consciousness, becoming receptive to divine energy and guidance.
Like building a bridge between yourself and the divine.
Precisely. And again, we see that balance between action and prayer. Someone who doesn't pray is cutting off that connection like Esau, too self-reliant. But someone who only prays and doesn't take action isn't living up to their potential, like Ishmael. True spiritual work is action infused with faith, nurtured by prayer.
The theme of balance keeps coming up. Now, how about divine providence, Hashgachah? How do we as humans factor into this, particularly from a Kabbalistic perspective?
Well, in Kabbalah, faith and prayer are connected to Sephirot, the emanations of divine energy. Faith, emuna, is linked to bina, understanding, and malchut, the realm of manifestation where the spiritual takes form in the physical world.
And tefillah, prayer, where does it fit in? How do we use it to connect to those divine energies?
Prayer is seen as actively drawing down light and energy from higher Sephiroth, like cheesed, kindness, and gevira, judgment and strength, down into malchut, the physical world. Through prayer, we channel these influences into our lives and the world around us.
And what about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Do their qualities relate to the Sephiroth in this idea of balancing faith and action within divine providence?
They absolutely do. Abraham is associated with cheesed, kindness, Isaac with gevura, judgment, and Jacob with tiferet, the balance between them. This highlights the importance of finding that balance on your own spiritual journey.
So striving for balance, like Jacob, means aligning with a more harmonious flow of divine energy and guidance in our lives.
Exactly. So what are the practical takeaways here? How can we cultivate this balance between faith and action within divine providence?
Let's recap. Faith, emuna, is a deep trust that goes beyond what we can grasp intellectually. Prayer, tefillah, is actively connecting with divine reality. It's not just asking, but aligning our will with the divine will. And fundamentally, we need to balance that deep trust with our actions in the world. Neither passive reliance nor a purely material view of the world will lead to true spiritual growth.
Exactly. And remember, true emuna isn't passive like Ishmael or purely physical like Esau. It's the balance of both, like Jacob. Rabbi Nachman advises us to cultivate emuna through personal prayer and reflection, what's called hitbodedat, speaking to God daily. It's a tangible way to develop trust.
That idea of daily personal connection with the divine really speaks to me. Now let's move on to Joseph and Balaam. Their stories seem to offer more insights into this dynamic of faith, action, and divine will.
They do. Joseph, in Kabbalah, is associated with Yesod, the conduit for abundance flowing into the world. What's important about him is his resistance to impurity, refusing temptation. This strength came from his emuna, his purity. Because of his unwavering faith, he was immune to negative influences, even the evil eye.
So his faith wasn't just passive, it actively protected him.
Exactly. Now, contrast that with Balaam. He's a fascinating but troubling figure. He was a non-Jewish prophet with great spiritual power, but he misused it for personal gain. He represents impurity, the Sitra Achra, a cautionary tale.
It's interesting, how could someone who could perceive the divine still do such negative things?
It's important to remember that spiritual power doesn't equal holiness. Balaam had visions, but his desire for wealth and status corrupted him, blinded him to true understanding.
There's that image of his donkey seeing the angel before he could. What does that symbolize?
It's ironic, right? The donkey, a symbol of physicality, was more attuned to the divine than the prophet. Balaam was so focused on his ego, his material desires, that he was spiritually blind. It shows how earthly desires can cloud our spiritual perception.
And even though Balaam wanted to curse the Israelites, God turned his curse into a blessing. What does that tell us about divine providence?
It shows that even darkness and negativity are under God's control. When someone is connected to the divine, like the Israelites were then, even evil can be turned into good. And this miracle also showed the world that God protects those who are aligned with divine will.
So Abraham, Joseph, and Balaam, their stories weave together to show us how faith, action, and divine providence work in the world and our lives.
Absolutely. Abraham embodies emuna beyond logic, Joseph embodies emuna through perseverance, and Balaam shows us what happens without true emuna. It all highlights the need for both faith and action.
So, to sum up, emuna is that foundation of trust beyond rationality. Prayer, tefillah, is actively aligning with divine will. And figures like Balaam show that spiritual power without holiness leads to destruction. But living in divine alignment can turn curses into blessings.
Well said.
That was a very powerful point. Now, what about the issue of suffering, as seen in the story of Job? Why does such a righteous man suffer so much?
It's a question that's puzzled people for ages. The Talmud says Job's suffering was a test, a way to elevate him further. The Midrash suggests it was a consequence of his inaction when the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt. And Kabbalah says it was a soul purification process, something beyond our full understanding. So suffering isn't always direct punishment. It could be a test, a consequence, or even a way to refine your soul.
I see. And when Job questions why he's suffering, how does God respond?
God doesn't give him a simple explanation.
It's more about revealing the vastness of creation, right?
Exactly. God shows Job the wonders and complexities of the natural world. It highlights the limits of human understanding. The point is, If Job can't understand the mysteries of the universe, he certainly can't fully understand divine justice, which Kabbalah tells us operates on multiple spiritual levels.
So when we face suffering we don't understand, true imuna involves accepting that God's justice operates on a level beyond our comprehension.
Precisely.
And Job ends up humbling himself, realizing he doesn't understand everything, regretting that he questioned.
This is where the Hasidic idea of faith becomes so important. It's about trusting the divine order, even when you don't have all the answers. Job's story teaches us that it's natural to struggle with faith when things are hard. But Kabbalah and Talmud tell us that true emunah is balancing acceptance with seeking understanding. It's about trusting in God's wisdom and plan. It steers us away from passivity, like Ishmael, and a purely intellectual approach, like Esau, and helps us find a middle ground.
That's really helpful. Now, what about the story of Adam and Eve? How does their fall connect to the idea of losing faith?
This story is key to understanding our journey of faith. Kabbalah talks about 4 spiritual worlds. Before the fall, Adam and Eve were on a higher plane, close to Absolute, pure divine emanation. They had a direct awareness of truth, pure emunah. It wasn't something they had to work for, it was just their reality.
So, what was the consequence of eating from the tree of knowledge?
It was a descent into materiality, the start of seeing separation from God, duality. Before, they saw unity, everything is an expression of God. After, they started seeing opposites, good versus evil, self versus other. This led to their descent from higher spiritual realms to lower ones.
And the serpent, what role does it play?
The serpent, in Kabbalah, represents the Sitra Achra, the forces that hide truth. By listening to it and questioning God, Adam and Eve chose intellectual arrogance, the belief they knew better over faith. This is when they lost that connection and entered a world of uncertainty and suffering.
And the symbolism of them becoming aware of their nakedness.
It's a powerful image. Before, it was innocent, pure. After, it represented their brokenness, shame, separation. It shows how losing faith leads to fear and hiding.
I see. Now, how does the story of Noah and the flood fit in? Was it an attempt to restore faith?
The world before the flood was corrupt. People had abandoned faith. But Noah found grace, which is interpreted as faith, although not as strong as Abraham's. He obeyed God without question, showing trust. But the story of him being drunk and naked after the flood suggests he was still vulnerable, perhaps even despairing after all the destruction. Some connect his misuse of wine, which symbolizes wisdom, back to Adam misusing knowledge. Noah's face was important, but it wasn't a complete restoration. It took Abraham for that.
So Noah was a step, but Abraham was the key.
Exactly. His life was a series of 10 tests, each refining his emunah, making him the father of faith. He left his home, endured famine, Sarah being kidnapped, war, the covenant of the parts, the births of Ishmael and Isaac, circumcision, challenges with Abimelech, sending Hagar and Ishmael away, and finally, the Akedah. The Zohar sees the Akedah as fixing Adam's sin. Adam doubted, but Abraham obeyed completely, reestablishing faith.
So the Torah shows us this arc, Adam losing faith, Noah partly restoring it, and then Abraham fully restoring it.
It shows that faith is a journey, always evolving, requiring trust even through challenges. The key takeaway from Kabbalah is that faith is surrendering to divine reality, even when it doesn't make sense.
That's a powerful insight. Can you sum up how Emunah, Tefillah, and Hashgacha Pratit connect, based on what we've discussed?
They're deeply intertwined. Emunah, that foundational trust, allows you to connect with God. Prayer, Tefillah, is how you actively align yourself with divine will and open yourself to guidance and blessings. And divine providence, Hashgacha Pratit, is the framework where all this happens. Our faith and prayer shape how we experience divine guidance.
So it's not about accepting fate or just relying on ourselves. It's about finding that balance between trusting in God's wisdom and engaging with the world purposefully, guided by that faith.
Exactly.
This has been incredibly insightful. To wrap up, here's a thought for you, our listener. Think about how this balance between trust and action plays out in your own life. Are there areas where you could lean more on faith, surrendering to a higher wisdom? Or are there areas where taking action inspired by faith could lead to more fulfillment? It's in that reflection on how our inner faith and our actions connect that we find the potential for real spiritual growth.